As Colonel Eriksen gave the order to fire, he could not be certain of the nationality of the ships fired upon. When asked by a subordinate if the right choice had been made, he responded, "Either I will be decorated or I will be court-martialed." Although Norway was neutral, Eriksen was well aware that the government was likely to support the Allies if it could not prevent its involvement in the war. Although he was unaware of it at the time, as the enormous warship sank in flames, his actions had saved Norway from capitulation. The Nazi-German invasion of Norway was launched to protect the port of Narvik and vital rail link to the Swedish iron ore mines upon which Germany depended for critical steel production. Controlling Norway would also give the Kriegsmarine access to the Atlantic Ocean. German U-boats and surface ships operating out of Norwegian bases would be able to break the British blockade line across the North Sea and attack convoys heading to Britain. Hitler feared that the British were going to disregard Norwegian neutrality and land troops in Norway. To forestall this, Hitler launched Operation Weserübung, the invasion and occupation of Denmark and Norway on April 8, 1940. The assault elements of the German invasion force were carried on warships divided into 6 task forces. To achieve complete surprise, all the German landings would have to occur simultaneously over nearly 1,000 miles of coastline from Oslo to Narvik. Seaborne landings were slated for the Norwegian capital of Oslo and the important coastal cities of Bergen, Egersund, Kristiansand, Trondheim, and Narvik, while 2 airborne assaults would seize vital airfields at Stavanger and Fornebu. Even though the Norwegian military was not well prepared, the Germans knew they had to strike hard and fast to achieve an early knockout blow. Hitler was already planning to invade France and the Low Countries, so the Germans could not afford to have men and material tied up in a lengthy campaign in Norway. Thus, Task Force 5, which had the mission of capturing the Norwegian capital of Oslo, was a crucial part of Operation Weserübung. On board its ships were special detachments of troops to capture the Norwegian king, leading members of government, and military high command within the first few hours of the invasion. It was hoped that the captured leaders, surprised and disheartened, would quickly capitulate and a peaceful occupation of the country could be completed before the British and French could even respond. TF-5 consisted of the heavy cruisers Blücher, pocket battleship Lutzow, the light cruiser Emden and various smaller vessels. Blücher was the newest of the major German surface units, having just completed sea trials prior to the Norwegian invasion. With a full displacement of 18,500 tons, she was the biggest cruiser in service with any nation. The sea approach to Oslo is via a 100-kilometer-long fjord, a restricted, winding, and often narrow waterway that affords ships little room to maneuver. As they penetrated the outer mouth of Oslo Fjord late on the night of April 8, a thick fog hung over the water, concealing the German ships. Orders had been issued to ignore any warning shots from the Norwegian defenders and to hold their fire unless otherwise ordered. At around 11 p.m., a Norwegian patrol boat collided with a German destroyer in the fog. Before sinking, she launched 3 flares, the prearranged signal that foreign warships were entering the restricted area. Alerted by the flares, the Norwegian shore battery on Roy Island and Fort Bolern fired warning shots that went unheeded. At 11:45, the flotilla halted briefly as landing parties were put ashore to capture the 2 forts from behind, while the bulk of the warships then proceeded farther up the fjord. By 4:15 hours on the morning of April 9th, Warship Group 5 was approaching the last artillery batteries covering the approach to Oslo harbor. The Germans were unsure whether the Oscarsborg fortress was operational, as some charts listed it as a museum. The brick and mortar structure, originally completed in 1855, just 40 years after the end of the Napoleonic War, had actually been retained as a training establishment. In 1893, a new main battery armament, 3 Krupp 11-inch coastal guns, were purchased, ironically, from Germany. They were so antiquated that no armor-piercing rounds were available. Only high explosive, and the crew had no top cover for protection. They took so long to reload that any ship initially fired upon would have passed the fortress in the meantime. In command of Oscarsborg Fortress was 64-year-old Colonel Blücher Christian Eriksen. He had started his military career in 1896, and now, with only 6 months left before retirement, he was to see out his career commanding a training establishment.
Vi har kun besetning til kanon 1.
Ja, fordel mannskap på begge kanoner og tilkall alle ikke-stridende. Sett gang øvelser umiddelbart.
Vi har fremdeles ikke hørt noe fra Oslo, hverken fra forsvarsledelsen eller politisk hold. Det er ingen som har tatt en beslutning. Vi har ingen ordre om å skyte oberst.
On the opposite shore from Oscarsborg Fortress, situated atop a hill overlooking the fjord, was a battery of 3 British-made 6-inch guns.
Oberst, kanon 1 og 2 er klar til strid.
Bra. Du begynner å haste med den lyskasteren inn i dørbart av dem.
Unknown to the Germans, the fortress was armed with an obsolete torpedo battery that fired a primitive torpedo whose country of manufacture no longer existed. Nobody knew for sure if they would explode upon coming into contact with a ship.
Kommandørkaptein Andersen vil ha en kategorisk ordre. Om man skal avfyre torpedoer mot ankommende fartøyer. Melder om silhuett av flere store fartøyer. Oberst.
Fart uten lanterne inn i fjorden vår. Dette er krigsskip, så hvis fanden skal forskyte, ingen diskusjon. Kom inn, kommando! Hva om vi tar feil?
The German ships approached the fortress in a column formation, 600 meters apart, at 12 knots. The flagship, Blücher, led the column, followed by the Lutzow, then Emden. Colonel Eriksen wanted to ensure that the ships were close enough for the shells to have a good chance of hitting their target because each gun only allowed him to fire 1 round.
Sett 1200 meter!
Avstand!
Ild!
Kanoner! Ild!
The 2 shells from the 11-inch guns were direct hits. The results were devastating. The first 11-inch shell struck the bridge while the second shell entered Blücher's port side behind the funnel and exploded inside the ship, destroying the rudder controls. Eriksen's example was followed by the 6-inch gun battery, which started firing. 3 aircraft and barrels of fuel were stored in the airplane hangar when it was struck by a shell from the shore batteries, which ignited the gasoline and resulted in a powerful explosion. Rapidly spreading fire ignited aerial bombs, ammunition, and hand grenades that were stored in containers on deck. The Germans attempted to accelerate in an effort to escape the reach of Norwegian guns, but engine damage made this difficult. The burning cruiser moved slowly northward, into the torpedo battery's arc of fire. As they hissed through the water, the 2 torpedoes that were launched went undetected. The first struck the Blücher forward, while the second struck amidships, causing massive explosions inside the German warship. Water poured into the damaged ship and the engines had stopped working. However, the raging fire was the main issue. When this reached the ship's magazine, her fate was sealed. A huge explosion tore the ship apart at 5:30, forcing the captain to give the order to abandon ship. Oil spilled from Blücher covered the water in flames as it ignited. Scores of those who abandoned ship perished in the inferno. At 6:22, the massive ship finally capsized and sank by the bow with a large number of people still on board. German plans were severely disrupted by the loss of the most advanced ship in the German Navy as well as about 1,000 sailors and soldiers. After seeing the devastation Blücher had sustained and taking 3 hits himself from 6-inch shells, the captain of Lutzow made the decision not to push his luck and changed course, leaving the strait behind him as the remaining ships followed. The Germans began landing troops farther down the fjord, at a safe distance from the forts. By 8 o'clock, almost 900 German soldiers had landed and were making their way on foot to the fortifications. The air assault element of the operation was the Germans' last remaining chance to take Oslo on April 9. By 8:30 a.m., the Germans had occupied the airfield at Fornebu and had called for reinforcement. By midday, about 900 men had arrived and were prepared to start their march toward Oslo. At 2 p.m., Colonel Schnittler, the acting commandant in Oslo, who had no troops with which to resist, signed the document surrendering control of the city. Colonel Eriksen's determined and decisive action had upset the ambitious German schedule, and this crucial 9-hour delay allowed the Norwegian government and royal family to flee the capital before the Germans arrived. The military commands and the gold reserves of the central bank were also evacuated. Instead of the hope for quick coup to assure a peaceful occupation like that of Denmark, the Germans were forced to undertake a grueling 62-day campaign to subdue Norway. To oppose German rule, Norway's legitimate government, headed by its king, evacuated to Britain. As a result, the Norwegian government in exile was established in London and remained there throughout the war, rendering the German puppet government invalid. After the war, a grateful nation awarded Eriksen the War Cross with Sword, the country's highest honor, while France gave him 2 of its highest honors. In 1995, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, the Norwegian king unveiled a statue of Eriksen at Oscarsborg Fortress, where it remains to this day guarding the Fjord, keeping a lookout for any potential invader. If you liked this video, there are many similar high-quality videos on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and press that bell icon so you don't miss the next video.